Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I really just want to say thanks for giving us the space to talk about food access, because I think when we talk about food in Portland, we always talk about the good stuff, and there's so much of it, but I really like that we're bringing this into the conversation, because I think it's really important. So, fresh food access for all, I think that's kind of a loaded statement. It's a declaration, but it really needs to be unpacked a little bit. So I want to talk about what that means to me and hopefully kind of get to the bottom of what that mission statement actually means and how we serve it in a way that we feel is the most effective at My Street Grocery. So I figured I'd start by telling you a little bit about my story, because I often get asked, so how did you get into the mobile grocery business? Which is a fair question. I didn't exactly lay in my bed as a little girl dreaming of one day becoming a grocer. I don't know if anyone does that. And yet here I am, very proud and passionate of my career as a grocer. So it kind of started, I did a little storyboard. I'm looking over the sea of possibilities of Portland back in January of 2007 when I moved here, kind of on a whim, just because I heard that Portland was cool, and so far it is. A few years later, I went to get my MBA at Portland State University, and I focused on social enterprise. And then I went to India, and then I went to a business plan competition, and then I started selling vegetables with cute kids, and then I bought a truck. So that's the very obvious story of how I got here. I think the point to me is that it's never really obvious when you're exploring your passion and your purpose. And it's really uncomfortable a lot of the time. It's like, what am I doing? What have I gotten myself into? What does it all mean? You know, I've had my fair share of existential crises, and I think that what happens is when you look back over something like this, in hindsight, you can tell a story. I can actually tell a story that makes sense, that connects all of these things, and I purposefully didn't to illustrate the point, but I think what I figured out over time, over looking back at the past few years of how I got from A to B, there's one connecting thread, and for me, it's food. That's a little convoluted up there, but I wanted to talk about social enterprise because I use that term a lot, and I'm never really sure how familiar people are with it. So it doesn't have anything to do with Facebook or Twitter or any social media. But how many of you have heard the term social enterprise? Sweet. How comfortable would you be actually defining it if that sort of weird definition wasn't up there? It's pretty good. So I really hope that this becomes a bigger part of the conversation every day, because social enterprise to me is really awesome, and I learned about it when I was studying at PSU, and particularly when I went and got to spend a month in India, and I got to really see social enterprise take shape. So what it is actually using the power of business to create positive social change. Using business to solve social problems. That's awesome. That really resonates with me. That means we get to use one of the most powerful tools in the world, arguably, business, and solve really important problems. We get to change the world, you know, or at least we want to. And when I learned about that, when I had the language to describe it and I saw it in action, I knew that that's what I needed to do. That's what made sense to me. But then I also had this other passion floating around, which is food, as I kind of mentioned before. And I didn't know where to place that, and I didn't know how to insert it into my life. And, you know, people are like, oh, you like food? Well, go to culinary school. And I thought about it, but it wasn't exactly what I thought I wanted to do. Although I am kind of a chef stalker, so watch out if you're chefs out there, because I really love that profession too. But for me, that wasn't it. It was, why do I love food? Other than eating it. And it was that I always had a positive experience with food. It's evocative and it's nostalgic and it's a great memory. But not everybody has a positive association with food, and I wanted to know why. So I kind of started asking those questions, and it led me to this kind of focus of my graduate research, which was food access in urban communities. Food deserts is a term that we just heard and that you've, I'm sure, heard before. I don't really use it anymore, but that's kind of what I looked into. And so I used this social enterprise newfound passion and my love for food, and I put them together, and I decided to design My Street Grocery, which is a mobile grocery program that provides fresh food access in underserved or low access communities and populations. Thank you. All right. So essentially what My Street Grocery does is we partner with communities and organizations and populations, and we have a truck. It's an old Franz bread truck. Really excited about that. I drive it, and we drive into communities, and we have a predetermined time and location and day of the week that we're going to be there on a route system, so everyone knows to expect us, and we're open to the public. Anyone's welcome to come shop. We have a variety of full service grocery items. We have lots of produce, and then we have the rest of the basics too, because you're probably not going to leave your house because you need an apple, but you might for eggs or milk, so we have those too. Excuse me, I'm sort of fighting the weather here. So that's basically the My Street Grocery business model, and it sounds pretty straightforward, but what makes us a social enterprise is that we exist to serve a mission. It's not an afterthought, it's our purpose. So our mission is everywhere. I've said it every time I ever talk about My Street Grocery. We're a mobile grocer with a mission to increase fresh food access for all. So we're kind of back at the beginning, that first slide. What does that mean? What is fresh food access? How do we address it? And we had to really think about that hard to understand how we were going to serve our mission appropriately, because if we couldn't define it, then we can't really measure it, and we can't be successful. And there's really one word in that statement that I think is the most complicated, and it's access. So we try to look at what that means. And the USDA defines a food desert as a geographic location where there's limited fresh food options. And I think, as Rob said, that there are many definitions of food desert, but that's kind of the one that started the conversation. And so it sounds like a fairly easy problem with an easy solution. Okay, there's a geographic location, there's a town, there's no grocery store. What do we do? Open a grocery store, maybe? Sounds easy. But that didn't solve the problem. It persists, so why is that? It's obviously bigger than that. So we needed to understand what access really looked like. So we started asking people. We started asking our neighbors and our friends and ourselves and people in the community, what does access look like to you? So if I opened a grocery store in one of these communities where they haven't had fresh food options for years, for maybe generations, and they're not used to seeing a lot of the produce that we bring in, they might not even know what it is, let alone how to cook it and why it would be valuable. So is that access? What if I brought someone to a beautiful grocery store or a farmer's market and dropped them in the middle of it and said, here you go, here's a list of definitions of produce and knock yourself out. But maybe they're not used to shopping for fresh foods and they don't know how to budget for that and they're on a really limited income, so it's not financially accessible. Is that access? This is actually a story that happened at My Street Grocery. We served a senior community out in outer southeast Portland, and there is a grocery store almost right next door to it. So if you were to look at that food desert map, they're not going to show up there. Grocery store right there, no problem. But they were expressing this interest in our service. They had this barrier to access, so we started asking, well, what does it look like to you? Why are your needs not being met? And they said, well, we have to cross some busy roads, and walking is hard. And it's actually a WinCo. So they said the aisles are really long and narrow, and a lot of us use walkers, and it's really kind of a challenge to get through there. And you have to bag your own groceries at WinCo. So it was too physically demanding. It wasn't meeting their needs. So that's not access. But if you just look at a map, you wouldn't know that. So we really had to spend some time unpacking that word to serve our mission, because we were missing a lot. And in Portland especially, we were missing all of these sort of nuanced access points that are listed here, including the one out in left field, which is a challenge because it's undefined. But everyone's fighting their own battle, and we want to try to provide support in as holistic of a way as we can so we can really address access. So we tried to broaden the mission a little bit, which is usually not a good idea. I usually want to try to focus your mission, but we broadened it. to try to encapsulate all these things we were learning about access. So we sort of have three little areas that we try to keep in mind as we're working every day. And one of them is obviously to provide fresh food options, affordable fresh food options. And options is the important word there because we're not providing answers, we're providing options. Because what people have been robbed of in these communities is choice a lot of the time. So we're bringing that back, and we're trying to provide the tools that people need to help make the choices that they want to make. Another part of our new purpose is to promote community well-being through nutrition education and awareness. Blah, that's a mouthful. But it's not just about like eat this, don't eat that. It's helping people find value and joy in eating food that's really good for you, tastes good, fun. And that's through partnerships with nutrition organizations. We work with Oregon State Extension's Food Hero program that does cooking demonstrations. People get to taste food, which is always a really fun seller, free samples. And then we also have what we call meal kits at My Street Grocery, and those are part of our kind of educational tool where we actually kind of deconstruct a meal and we put together all of the whole ingredients that you need to make a specific meal and the recipe card, and we package it and sell it as one unit. So it's usually about $2 to $3 per serving, so we can fight fast food on that front. And you actually have to cook it, so it's kind of stealthy education. It's not like forcing it down your throat, but people are really excited when they come back and they're like, I made that and it turned into food and I ate it and my kids ate it and it was good, and then they're excited, and then they start kind of improvising and getting creative, and then the joy happens. And that's what brings us to the last part, which is we want to enhance connection through the joy of nourishing food, because it should be joyful. And connection is really the important part to me. My Street Grocery serves all of these things, and it's grown bigger than me, luckily. But for me personally, the connection piece is important because that's what I thought about from the beginning, and that's kind of this whole common thread thing about food and what does it mean, and it's because food provides connection, and it brings people together in a really unique way. And I think that that's really deep down what My Street Grocery is about, and that's kind of what keeps me in it. It keeps me excited about it. So they asked me to talk about food and society, and I decided I was going to change it. Sorry. But when I think about society, just personally, it feels really sterile to me. Society is like a collection of laws that govern a body of nameless, faceless people. And it's important, but community feels better to me because the distinction that I feel in my own mind is that in communities we have relationships. And that's the distinction there. So I want to talk about food and community. You probably meant that when you said food and society, but I just wanted to put my own little spin on it. So community is about relationships. And if that's the difference, then how do we build community? We form relationships. Well, how do we do that? How do we form and nurture relationships? George and Tina. What do you do when you take someone out on a first date? How do you celebrate a milestone or mourn a loss? How do you welcome someone into your home or into your country or your culture, even if you don't speak the same language? With food. It's how we show love. It's how we communicate. It's cross-cultural and cross-generational. It's breaking bread. There's a reason that we say, let's break bread together. It's literal. And it's also figurative. It's let's connect. Let's form a relationship. And sometimes that's the only thing that we have in common. We all eat. So why can't we all do it in a positive way? Why can't we share that and kind of expand the joy of nourishing food? To me, I sort of think that food, sharing food, should be swarmed by a bike gang. It should be a requirement of a community, not a benefit. A community deserves the right to have access to delicious, nourishing, healthful food that makes people happy. And yet we live in a world, in a country, in a city, the beautiful food city of Portland, where in our own backyards, people don't have equal access to fresh foods. And I think that's crazy. I mean, when I first learned that over 23 million Americans have limited access to fresh food, and that's probably the MAP number, not the nuanced access number. I was shocked. Maybe I'm naive, but this is America. Like, that's crazy. It's not cool with me. Is it cool with you? I mean, why are you here? Why are we here talking about food? Why are we eating together? Felt like we needed to do something about it, and really, it's about that community piece. So how are we gonna move forward now that we've identified this sort of downer? Sorry about the downer with the food, you know, we have identified this big problem. There's a big problem with food access in our country, and we want to talk about the future of food. That doesn't look very bright. So, okay, it's Portland. Let's talk about a future-oriented word that we all love, sustainability. What does it actually mean? If you look it up before the buzzwordiness of it, it actually means having the ability to last. So how do we create a bright, positive, sustainable future when it comes to food access? Well, I think that we should talk about eating right. Does everybody feel like kind of, oh God, eating right? It's like a negative association. It's always deprivation. It's like, oh, well, the Super Bowl was on Sunday and I ate a bunch of junk food, so I got to eat right this week. Or like, no, I'm not going to have that brownie at the end of lunch because I'm eating right. It doesn't feel good. It feels like a chore. And that's a problem because it doesn't have to be. I think we should redefine that. I'm all about terms, as you can see. So when we talk about eating right, to me, eating well, eating right is about eating food that comes from the earth, real food. That's 5 more minutes. That's prepared in a way that's respectful of where it came from and of what it's giving to us. And that's worthy of the people that are eating it. So that means worthy of the Queen of England, Bill Gates, Michael and Al. I played bingo with them a few weeks ago. They're some of my most long-term and loyal customers. Worthy of them, worthy of me, you. I think that we need to really think about all of the negativity that we put around food, around real food, and put a positive spin on it. Michael makes a great carrot soup. So I don't know this guy's name, but I call him Strawberry Lover because I always remember him because he kept coming back to one of our markets out in Northeast Portland to eat more strawberry samples because he had to give one to his friends. And every time he came back, he was like a little more sticky and covered, but he had more friends to give it to. And maybe he doesn't remember me or my street grocery or whatever, but maybe he remembers strawberries a little bit more. Maybe he already knew what they were, but maybe he made a positive association with food. He looks pretty happy. So maybe that's the beginning. Maybe I'm giving us too much credit, but maybe it's the beginning of a little connection with food that's positive. It's not about deprivation, and it's not about getting in trouble or eating the wrong thing or education or limited access. It's just something positive. And I think that he could share that with his friends or his family and start to kind of grow that love, that joy around nourishing food. So we talk about the difference between society and community and its relationships. How do we build relationships? We share food. Food is the connector. Food is the thing that brings us together, and food is something that we can share, and we can create an impact that's greater than the sum of its parts. So to me, it's about sharing food. That's the future. When we share food, that's when we really create vibrant, resilient, sustainable community. That's the future that I want. And that's the future that My Street Grocery is working for every day. So, thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about my passion.